Chapter 11. "Good job," said Daniel to Richards when the door clicked shut. Daniel stepped to the back of the small room and touched the wall. A different panel slid open. "Man, oh man," said Richards excitedly. "Did you see that? I thought he was going to reach me for sure. How did you know they would catch him in time?" "Royal security officers are very good at catching people who run," replied Daniel as he removed a black security bag from within the opening and closed the panel. "And you held your ground like a seasoned veteran," Daniel added approvingly. He took the shoe from within his jacket and placed it in the security bag. "I almost didn't," confessed Richards. "He looked pretty scary coming at me, but then I saw you standing there unconcerned, watching me, and I couldn't do less. You're only a non, after all." Said Daniel non-committedly as he removed the camera from his pocket and placed it in the security bag, too. "Thank goodness for youthful pride," he thought as he sealed the security bag. Pulling out a quill, Daniel carefully labeled the contents of the bag, the date, and the location of where the items were obtained. Aloud, he added, "Wizard Security has a reputation for fearlessness. You just added to their legend." Daniel tucked the bag under his arm and then touched the wall in a different location, causing a different panel to slide open. "I did?" asked Richards as Daniel removed his hat and placed it in the opened compartment. "Yes, I did, didn't I?" Richards confirmed, straightening with pride. Richards removed his hat and handed it to Daniel to put inside. "How did you know he was up to something, anyway?" asked Richards eagerly. "Body language," replied Daniel briefly as he removed the red armbands. "It can be very revealing," Daniel added as he placed the red bands in the compartment. He removed his hat and, after collecting Richard's hat, placed them both in the compartment as well. Then he closed the panel. "And the way you got him to run," laughed Richards. "It was like watching the headmaster put the nons through their paces at school." Richards' eyes suddenly narrowed. "It was exactly like that," he mused. "Especially when your lip curled up." Daniel removed his wand from the belt and returned it to his pocket, while Richards appraised him with a calculating eye. "Does the headmaster know what you're doing?" Richards asked bluntly. "Just wait until I tell them back at school what you do," he added gleefully, while returning his own wand back to its proper place. Daniel took a deep breath. "I must remind you," he began, "that you have signed numerous confidentiality agreements and that everything you saw and heard in the Royal Security Station must not be related outside security premises." "That means everything," Daniel emphasized. "Yeah, right," said Richards dismissively, with a nasty gleam in his eye. It was clear that a confidentiality clause would not deter him, so Daniel added quietly, "You should know by now that nothing can be kept from Headmaster Snape." Richard started. He probably thought he had stumbled on a deep secret useful for blackmail purposes. Daniel continued, while ignoring Richard's reaction. "The headmaster has also ordered me to provide him with the names of every person that accompanies me to a Royal Security Station. If word of what I do in the performance of my duties ever leaks out, he will know exactly who did the talking." That wiped the smirk off Richard's face. Richards was still attending Hogwarts and would be under the direct control of the headmaster in the fall. "Shall we return to the station?" asked Daniel calmly while holding out his hand. Richards glowered, but said nothing as he grabbed Daniel's hand. Daniel apparated the two back to the station. Daniel had worked in security for about 3 years when he was first ordered to take an intern with him to a Royal Security Station. Unlike Richards, that intern hadn't said a word about what he had seen during the visit. But the very next day, Daniel received a summons to see Headmaster Snape at Hogwarts, immediately. Slytherin Security Colonel Vincent Clabb had laughed unkindly when handing Daniel the summons and asked Daniel what he had done. Daniel pleaded ignorance, the kind attributed to all nons, claiming he was unable to fathom the greater workings of a Slytherin mind, especially one as complex as Headmaster Snape. But there had been no doubt in Daniel's mind what the topic of the meeting would be. The only saving grace of the situation was that at least the headmaster hadn't sent along some new Death Eaters to escort Daniel to Hogwarts, making sure he arrived safely. Instead, Daniel was expected to walk into the lion's den on his own. By this time, Daniel had worked long enough at security to know the futility of running and the ultimate consequence after recapture should he try. So Daniel gritted his teeth and reluctantly apparated to Hogsmeade. To his surprise, Daniel found a horseless carriage waiting at the station. Daniel got in, and the carriage took off. Daniel could not begin to describe the incredible sense of gloom and doom he felt while he took that trip. What would they tell his lovely wife Terica if he didn't come home that night? Would she learn the truth, or would they tell some lie to her and blacken his name? Daniel bitterly regretted having not updated his will or left Terica a letter in advance telling her of his feelings. He resolved to do both immediately, should he get out of this alive. Finally, Daniel saw the forbidding walls of Hogwarts loom ahead. It looked like a giant prison to which Daniel had hoped never to return. The gates swung open at his arrival, beckoning him within, bringing with it every terrifying memory Daniel ever had of the place. Surprisingly, as Daniel rode through the Hogwarts ground, those memories seemed to pale against some of the things Daniel had seen, sensed, and experienced during the course of his security work. The headmaster had been right. There were places worse than Hogwarts. The carriage slowed to a halt at the steps of Hogwarts. Reluctantly, Daniel got out. Immediately, 3 Dementors descended upon him hungrily. With no students around, they sought food wherever they could. Daniel avoided them easily by racing into the castle. They could not follow him there. "You're late," accused the growling voice of Hogwarts caretaker Argus Filch as the great doors clanged shut. Daniel remained silent. He wasn't late. There had been no specific time set for the meeting. Daniel knew the caretaker delighted in watching others squirm uncomfortably and refused to add to his pleasure. "Why are you here?" Daniel asked instead. "I'd heard you had, retired." "I have," admitted the caretaker grudgingly. "I'm just awaiting my replacement before I leave. Follow me," Filch added, leading Daniel up the stairs. Filch had always looked old when Daniel attended Hogwarts. Now he looked positively ancient. "Where will you go?" asked Daniel curiously as they rounded a corner. "I have some relatives in Ireland I plan to visit," he replied as they passed the huge painting portraying the victory fight, or, as the nuns referred to it, defeat of Dumbledore. "Oh," said Daniel politely. Filch's words were obviously a lie, but Daniel didn't press. He knew this was not a retirement of choice. Senior Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic, Augustus Rockwood, had submitted and recently gotten passed a new law forbidding access of magical property to all squibs, even if they could prove pure-blood wizard ancestry. Filch was no longer permitted to work or live at Hogwarts. "Good luck to you," said Daniel sincerely as they mounted the stairs. The way the current government was going, Daniel knew it would not be long before squibs would be added to the list of undesirables along with mudbloods. He hoped Filch would be able to find a safe place to hide before then. "Thank you," said Filch gruffly. They continued walking in silence, their footsteps echoing hollowly in the empty halls. The two stopped at the base of a large stone gargoyle ornamented with twisting snakes at the base. "Salazar," said Filch. The gargoyle sprang to life and hopped aside. The wall behind him split in two, revealing a large spiral staircase. "He's waiting for you," growled Filch. Daniel stood on the first step, and the stairs started moving smoothly up. They slowed to a stop when he reached the top. Daniel found himself facing a polished oak door with a brass door knocker that had the shape of a twining snake. As he stood in front of it, the door silently, ominously, swung open. Daniel remained rooted at the entrance with his eyes carefully downcast. He knew better than to enter a Slytherin abode uninvited. He stood there for what seemed like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes before a familiar whisper hissed the word, "Enter." Daniel fearfully stepped into a circular room with a high ceiling. Not that Daniel saw that. He kept his head and eyes down while he moved forward, as he had been taught to do. It was Daniel's first time in the headmaster's office, but he dared not look around. He was already in enough trouble. Though no longer a student under the headmaster's control, Daniel still knew that Headmaster Snape was a Death Eater and a person of considerable power. "Stop," commanded the voice, and Daniel stopped, frozen in place, standing in front of what appeared to be a large claw-footed desk. The headmaster was seated behind it. "Look at me," hissed the voice ominously. Daniel slowly raised his head and looked into the black eyes of Headmaster Snape. For a full minute, the headmaster fixed his cold black eyes unblinkingly on Daniel, his expression unfathomable, and Daniel, his mouth dry with fear and his stomach tying and untying in countless knots, stared back as instructed. "Do you know why you are here?" the headmaster finally whispered. Daniel took a deep breath and began. "A non cannot be expected to understand—" "I do not take you to be a fool, Pilkington," interrupted the headmaster coldly. "You were not summoned here to repeat mindless rhetoric. Now," he continued in that sibilant voice, his lip curling in a sneer, "need I repeat the question?" Daniel swallowed uncomfortably. "No, sir," he replied softly. "And yes, sir, I think I know why, sir." Daniel tried to look away, but found he couldn't. The inky black eyes seemed to hold Daniel prisoner while compelling him to continue. "It's about yesterday, isn't it?" he asked. The headmaster did not respond, and his expression did not change. "At the Royal Security Station," added Daniel hesitantly. Still, Headmaster Snape did not speak. His black eyes bore into Daniel relentlessly, and Daniel realized that none of what he had said so far would be reason enough for a summons. Daniel gulped nervously. Whoever had said that confession was good for the soul had never had to face Headmaster Snape. "I guess," continued Daniel fearfully, "the intern present maybe thought that I was acting a bit like you." He trailed off. Surely that would be enough to answer the question. "A bit?" hissed the headmaster, his black eyes narrowing ominously. Daniel gulped again. "Okay," he added in a rush, "maybe a lot like you." There was a long silence, and then that sibilant voice whispered, "Did you?" For one fleeting moment, Daniel considered denying it all, claiming the intern had made it up and seen nothing. But Daniel wasn't a very good liar, and he knew the headmaster would see through him immediately. "Yes, sir," Daniel reluctantly admitted. "I guess so," he added softly. And Daniel found himself finally able to drop his gaze and look away from those piercing black eyes. He could see the top of the desk now, and Headmaster Snape's long white fingers resting gently against each other on it. "Why?" "I had to," Daniel muttered, afraid to look up. "Were you ordered?" came the headmaster's silky voice. "No, sir, not in so many words," stammered Daniel, "but I still had to do it." "Explain." "It was for the job, you see," began Daniel. "The Muggles weren't to know about us being wizards, so I was forbidden to use a wand, and I was told they couldn't know there were two kinds of wizards either." Daniel trailed off. This was difficult to explain. "So?" hissed the headmaster. "I'm not a Slytherin," continued Daniel in a rush. "And, well, you're the only person I know who can scare us all to death without you using your wand, so you thought you'd impersonate me," finished the headmaster. "Yes, sir," agreed Daniel, hanging his head. "I'm sorry," he added sincerely. "I knew it was probably wrong, but—" "Did it work?" interrupted the soft voice. "Well, yeah," agreed Daniel. "Beautifully. The Muggles have never given me a bit of trouble, but I'll find some other way to manage things." Daniel fell into silence, unsure of what else to say, and afraid of what the headmaster would do next. The silence between them drew out so long that Daniel risked glancing up just a bit to see if the headmaster was still there. Daniel saw just the faintest of twitches on the headmaster's thin lips before hurriedly looking down again. "Have you behaved this way at any time other than in the course of your duties?" "Oh, no, sir," exclaimed Daniel earnestly, inadvertently looking up again into those inky black pools. "I wouldn't ever." Headmaster Snape stared back intently at Daniel, as if seeking to probe the very depths of his mind, and then the headmaster looked down, breaking the eye contact. He picked up a quill and began writing on a parchment lying on the desk. Daniel didn't remember seeing it there earlier. "See that you don't," said the headmaster softly while he wrote. Daniel stared at Headmaster Snape in astonishment. Had he just received permission to continue? Then the headmaster said something most unusual. "I want your word on that, Pilkington," he commanded. "Yes, sir, my word," agreed Daniel, with total sincerity, standing up straighter, relief flooding his entire body. No one had ever asked for his word before, least of all a Slytherin. "Also," added the headmaster, "I do not expect you to mention the subject of this conversation to anyone. Understand?" He handed Daniel an order form, reflecting his words. Daniel took the order and scanned it briefly. "No, sir, of course not," agreed Daniel readily, before folding the order and placing it carefully within his order folder. "I presume you did not mention the topic of our meeting beforehand?" the headmaster queried softly, again staring up at Daniel with those glittering black eyes. "No, sir, I didn't," replied Daniel, glad now he hadn't explained things further to the colonel. "Then we can consider this matter concluded," replied the headmaster in his usual cold voice, while scrutinizing Daniel steadily with his black eyes. "You are dismissed." Later, Daniel received written orders from the headmaster forbidding him to discuss his behavior while at Royal Security Station with anyone, and a second order arrived forbidding Daniel from doing impersonations of Headmaster Snape at any time except during the course of his duties as a security officer. Daniel knew that order had arrived not because the headmaster thought Daniel would break his word, but to prevent other Slytherins from giving orders that might force Daniel to break his word. Few would dare countermand the orders of a Death Eater. When Daniel and Richards returned to Wizard Security, Daniel headed straight towards Wizard Higgs's office. If Wizard Higgs was still out, Daniel would seek some other superior. He had to turn over the electronics material. Fortunately, Wizard Higgs was in. Daniel stopped just outside the door with his eyes carefully downcast and waited to be noticed. Richards, however, was under no such restriction. "That was the best ever," he told Wizard Higgs jubilantly while walking into the office. "You should have been there." "There was trouble?" asked Wizard Higgs sharply, looking up at Daniel. "A minor security breach," replied Daniel evenly, bowing briefly and then holding out the security pouch. "Commander Sloane is taking care of it." "Is he ever?" grinned Richards as Wizard Higgs held out his hand, motioning Daniel to come in. "I bet that muggle won't try anything like that again. He should have known better than to try to put one over on us." Daniel walked into the room and handed Wizard Higgs the pouch. Wizard Higgs read the label and frowned. "How long?" he asked while signing his receipt of it. He absently handed Daniel a receipt for the pouch and placed the pouch on his desk. "The muggle claims just today," said Daniel while folding the receipt. "You believe him?" "It seems most likely. But Commander Sloane is investigating further to be sure. He will include his findings in his report," added Daniel smoothly, while placing the receipt in his envelope. He didn't like discussing things that happened at Royal Security. "How was Richards?" inquired Wizard Higgs with concern. "He behaved like a veteran officer," replied Daniel sincerely. "That's great," replied Wizard Higgs heartily. "I knew you could," he added to Richards. "Will there be anything else?" Daniel asked, mindful of his other duties. Daniel always asked as a matter of habit whenever he was ready to leave a superior's presence. "No, that will be all," replied Wizard Higgs. Daniel nodded, bowing, and turned to leave. "Wait a minute," called out Wizard Higgs. Daniel stopped and turned around. "Sir?" "That girl this morning," Wizard Higgs began. "Did she speak with an accent?" "No, sir," replied Daniel. "Have you a name to add to her alert?" "That's the thing," replied Wizard Higgs. "Our search has gone through all the non-families with children that age and hasn't turned up a thing. She was a non attending Hogwarts, wasn't she?" "She never actually said," replied Daniel honestly. But she was familiar with Hogwarts, and definitely not Slytherin, he added. That's what I thought, replied Wizard Higgs. Well, while we're finishing all the local nons, I've another team checking the Scot and Irish nons. Maybe someone gave her an accent spell. It can last longer than Polyjuice. We'll find out who she is, he added confidently. Of course you will, replied Daniel automatically. Do you know where Wizard Flint is? Wizard Higgs asked. I want to give him an update. I believe he said he would go to Thorpe to follow a lead, replied Daniel. He may still be there. Thanks. Hey, Tom, want to come along? Sure, said Richards excitedly. Then give me your papers. I'll sign you out of security alert duty. You're all done with that anyway, aren't you? Yep, confirmed Richards cheerfully, not bothering to check with Daniels first. Richards pulled out his papers and gave them to Wizard Higgs. There, said Wizard Higgs, signing the papers and handing them back to Richards. That should take care of everything. Now you have new orders. Thanks, replied Richards. You're dismissed, Pilkington, Wizard Higgs added over his shoulder to Daniel. Yes, sir, said Daniel. He gave a brief bow and then walked out of the room. Daniel headed off to find security transport number 2 that Wizard Flint said he had parked outside Wizard Security Station. It still needed a potions cleanup from earlier that day. Courtesy, the green-eyed girl. Wizard Flint had ordered Daniel to take care of it as soon as he finished the security alerts. As he walked, Daniel removed the security pin from his lapel. Using his wand, he whispered a spell that would change the pattern he used to transfigure the pin back to an official wizard seal. Daniel changed the pattern for his seal after any person watched him make the transfiguration. The seal was also protected by other security measures of Daniel's own devisings, which he never mentioned to anyone. Few wizards were entrusted with a security seal, and fewer still were nons. Daniel was under no illusion what might happen to him should an unauthorized person get a hold of his seal and use it. The consequences, a very slow, agonizing death, if he was lucky, were clearly explained when Daniel was first given the seal and taught to transfigure it into a security pin. Daniel took the threat seriously and guarded his seal most carefully. When Daniel finished his spell, he committed the new pattern to memory, pocketed his wand, and carefully affixed the pin in place back on his lapel. Then he continued on his way to the front desk. When Daniel reached the front desk, he walked to a peg jutting out of the wall on the other side. Daniel put on the overcoat he found hanging on the peg. It was Cedric's overcoat, but Daniel didn't think Cedric would mind if he borrowed it. Then Daniel went out the civilian door. It wouldn't do for muggles to see Daniel walk out of an ordinary-looking door while wearing a security uniform. Daniel could have apparated himself directly outside, but all apparitions were logged in, and Daniel knew Wizard Flint wanted to keep this particular cleanup as quiet as possible. Once Daniel stepped outside, he scanned the narrow alley for muggle bypassers. There were none. Several anti-muggle wards were placed at strategic locations to keep it that way, but one still had to check. Daniel pulled out his wand to look for security transport number 2. It was parked outside somewhere, hidden by a disillusionment charm. It would be easy enough to find, as Daniel knew the transport was there and was looking for it. Daniel whispered a spell and pointed his wand at the dirty, trash-filled gutter on one side of the alley. Nothing happened. Then Daniel pointed his wand the other direction. A faint ripple of light appeared towards the end. That would be the transport. As Daniel walked up to the area where the ripple of light had appeared, he pictured in his mind the image of Wizard Flint having to return to Wizard Security using the civilian entrance, looking and smelling like, well, that would have been a sight to see. If the front office contained only nons at the time, Wizard Flint would be able to keep the state of his arrival quiet. If there had been Slytherins in the room, no telling what kind of gossip had been generated. Slytherins couldn't be ordered to keep quiet. Reaching out with his hand, Daniel found the end of the transport. He began to feel along the side for the door handle. Daniel was also rather glad he had been last in the office tested for the non-count. Otherwise, Wizard Flint might have been tempted to borrow Daniel's wand for the rest of the day. No non would dare refuse a Slytherin order for a wand, But Wizard Flint would have never made such an order while in the presence of new Death Eaters. He would have had to explain why. Daniel's fingers found the door handle. Using his security pin as a key for the lock, Daniel opened the door. Daniel held his breath in anticipation of the rank odor he knew would come out once the door was opened. The smell was pretty bad, as Daniel knew it would be, but not as bad as the black potion. While Daniel worked at cleaning out the transport, he pondered the strange case of the green-eyed girl. Why hadn't they yet identified her parents? She might be a Scot or an Irish, as Wizard Higgs suggested, but somehow Daniel doubted it. A different accent would not change the fact that two Slytherin students, one who was best in her class, and the other, a prefect, who Daniel knew was supposed to keep tabs on all non-students, had failed to identify her. They should have recognized the girl, despite her disguise. It hadn't been all that good. So who was she? Against all odds, Daniel began to wonder if a non-head count would successfully uncover the parents, as he had promised the girl. He had also suspected the parents would not come to fetch her, just as the girl had said. Where were they? Who were they? Why couldn't they come? If the girl had been telling the truth about her parents, perhaps she was telling the truth when she had said other things. Daniel finished cleaning the transport. Then he sat on the edge of the open door and spent some time just thinking. Finally, he reached into the pocket of Cedric's overcoat and pulled out the Muggle's cell phone that was kept there. He stared at it thoughtfully. When Cedric was originally shuttered from department to department, he was often ordered to follow a Slytherin to a remote place where the Slytherin would then abandon him. The Slytherins thought it funny to force Wizard Amos Diggory to hunt for his son. That's why the Nons placed a Muggle phone in Cedric's overcoat pocket. Even the Slytherins knew better than to let Cedric wander loose in a security uniform. A message was written on the phone for Muggles who might find Cedric. It was a simple message. My name is Cedric Diggory. If you are reading this, it means I am lost. Please dial, a number followed, and tell the parents answering where I am so I can go home. Thank you. Through the years, several kindly Muggles had used the phone, thus helping Cedric home. The Nons, of course, never mentioned having given a phone to Cedric. They changed the phone and the number one dialed periodically to keep it in sync with current Muggle technology. Specific. If the Slytherins knew about the phone, they never gave specific orders concerning it. Being Muggle-made, the phone was probably of no interest to the Slytherins. It only served to make Cedric look less wizard-like and more ridiculous. They didn't know that sometimes the phone was put to other uses. This was one such time. Daniel dialed a number and placed the phone to his ear.